The Monastery of Spinjitzu is an iconic location from Ninjago. It's where we see a lot of things begin within the show, it's one of the first locations we see within the show, and honestly, it's definitely earned its spot amongst Ninjago's history. It's just a location where a lot of really interesting and a lot of really cool scenes have taken place, as early as Kai's initial training montage, and as late as Raz vs Rontu, Frohiki, and also Geo. So it's a really interesting thing to actually see, and honestly, I'm really happy that we get a lot from this location. But the more I've thought about the Monastery of Spinjitzu, the more I've realised that the location, or more specifically the layout of the location, makes absolutely no sense. There is no cohesive nature to the monastery, and it changes on a fairly frequent rotation. So, I've tried my best to decipher how the Monastery of Spinjitzu is truly laid out. And spoiler alert, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So join me as I give my best depiction on how the Monastery of Spinjitzu is actually laid out, trying to clear up some of the locations of certain rooms, trying to clear up where things are actually laid out, and dispel any sort of inconsistencies, and also put to rest something that has slowly but surely crept up within the space of Ninjago. But I think nowadays, it's just something that's really funny, because I'm convinced the ninja are lying to us. Also, bear in mind, I don't mention the blacksmith that we see Kai use in March of the Oni, because it just physically can't exist where we see it. Apart from that, enjoy. But of course we need the basic layout of the monastery to be able to decipher where everything truly is. I am taking the layout that we see within Dragon's Rising, and the evidence I'm using is based off of the monastery within the 11-minute era and within Dragon's Rising as well, with a sprinkle of 10, but you'll see why that makes things a little bit difficult. I'm not considering the monastery before the Serpentine destroyed it in the first season, because it seems to be that the layout is very different. But like I said, this is the basic layout, but the thing that we need to consider from this point onwards is what do we actually know? What has remained consistent? What do we know for a fact is truly the case? Well, there are two things that I maintain are very consistent, that being the outside area, because it's something that we see the most, and also the doors. The thing is that we're fairly familiar with the door system that they actually have in place. They have one main door at the back, and they have two doors on each respective side, so a total of 5, and now we can add that onto the graph. And again, here it is, and this is honestly the end of what makes things relatively basic. This is the ending of things that we can say comfortably. Of course, I will say, I'm not including the little balconies that they seem to have along all the doors because I didn't really think it was relevant to the video. But like I said, it's this inside section, this big V that we have that we need to figure out what is actually going on with. And I'm slowly but surely figuring it out, so let me talk you through it. The first thing we're considering is the corridor itself. Within Dragon's Rising and the 11-minute era, we have had multiple scenes take place within these corridors. There is a lot of different paintings we see, a lot of different little artifacts that we see, and this is for sure something that is within the monastery. And also we know for a fact that it's directly connecting to the outside. This corridor is the first thing you see when you do enter the monastery, so we can add that onto the diagram. But before I show you that, I will also try and figure out how many rooms that we actually need within the monastery as well. We need to know how many rooms need to go on the opposite side of this corridor, because that is presumably how it is. It's just one big layered system. Or is it? More on that later, but the thing that we need to figure out is how many rooms are truly within the Monastery of Spinjitzu. We need to know what we're actually considering when it does come to this space. We can immediately assume that all 6 of the ninja have their own room. It's been referenced, we've seen a couple of them, but we've never seen all of them, but they're for a fact going to be there. So we can actually begin with 6. We then need to consider a 7th room because of Wu. We have seen a few scenes where Wu has his own room, and of course it makes sense that he does have one. So that does make a 7th. We can also then add on an 8th because we've had a scene with Pixel in her own room as well. So Pixel needs to be accounted for as well. And then we need a 9th bedroom because we also need to consider the fact that there is a guest room within the monastery. We have seen multiple people stay within the monastery at different points in time. We have seen Faith, Ray and Maya, we've seen Benthamar, we have seen multiple people actually stay within the area. So we need to know that there is at least 9 bedrooms. After that comes the additional little utility rooms essentially. We've seen multiple scenes of the ninja within a kitchen, so we know there's a kitchen amongst it, and we also know that there is a bathroom amongst it. So we need an additional 2 rooms to go along with that. But that is not even it. There are 2 more rooms that we know for a fact are within the monastery. We know that there is a relaxation room, we know where all the ninja get to hang out, we know that room does exist. And we also know that later does become Aaron and Sora's room, so we don't need to consider an additional room for them as well. So that's another room, and there is one more, and that is, of course, the library. So in a grand total, we have about 13 rooms to actually consider. And honestly, this was where it became a little more difficult. Because it's all well and good to know that we do have all of these rooms, but we don't really have much of an indication on where the layout actually does go. But as far as I'm concerned, this is the layout right here. 5 rooms on either side and then 3 at the top. And you may be questioning how I did come to this decision, and there is a line of logic behind it, so let me show you. But from here onwards, we are purely on guesswork. I started off with the top section. I tried to figure out how the general layout went when it did come to this top area, because it makes sense to believe that this area would have been a lot less packed. Well, for one, I believe the relaxation room is up there, I believe the library is up there, and I also believe Woo's room is up there as well. And generally speaking, it comes down to Woo being the master of the house in all accounts, the relaxation room just being relatively central, and also being where the elevator is, and the library going with that exact same logic. It was at this point where I spent a while trying to comb through Ninjago to try and find any sort of definitive instance where we actually know where one of these rooms could have been. If I can figure out one of these rooms, I could probably have figured out the other 2. And I actually did get that. I initially thought that the library was going to be the central room. I thought that was going to be the main spot because the outside of the building is where the roof is the tallest. And we know that the library is quite tall. But in actuality, I found evidence to suggest that the central room of the monastery is actually the relaxation room. I was looking in Dragon's Rising to see if the relaxation room had any defining features, and I did notice a couple of things. For one, on a complete side note, I noted that there was another section of corridors within the monastery, but actually those corridors seem to actually link to the relaxation room, because the relaxation room has 3 doors to it. So not only is it one of the central rooms, it has to be the middle one because of access reasons. So I immediately added on the relaxation room to the center and gave it its adjacent corridors, and this is how it looks. This seems to be where the relaxation room somewhat definitively is going to be. And it's really funny, but also kind of does make sense, because I was sure that it was the library, but no, this is it. This is definitely where the relaxation room has to be. So I then found myself trying to figure out which of Woo and the library went up top, and trying to figure out which way around it could have been. And it did actually come to me. I figured out which way they actually went. And it comes from this very specific shot of Woo, where Lloyd is trying to speak to them in Season 11. Woo has 2 doors. So Woo's room also links to those corridors that links back to the relaxation room. And because of the angling, there's one directly ahead and there's one to Woo's left. It means he's on the left side of the monastery. So we can firmly place Woo on the left side. Which means that we can somewhat comfortably say that the library is on the right side. It makes sense that it is up central, and also it's the only other way it could be around. So here it is. This is where we can actually put the library. There is no additional doors to the library, but that is completely fine. But it does mean that we know the top side of the monastery's locations. The next thing that I wanted to solidify before I went into the main thing, which was the bedrooms, was the location of the kitchen and the bathroom. I presumed that they were essentially on separate ends of the monastery. There's never been any implication to suggest that they would actually be close to each other, and honestly, it makes sense at the exact same time. This was honestly a difficult one to figure out though, because we don't really get too much of the kitchen or the bathroom. We get maybe a couple shots every few seasons at that. But there was one thing that implied to me that the kitchen does reside on the left side of the monastery. It comes from Season 11. The scenes where the Pyro Vipers are actually ransacking the monastery, we see one of the larger snakes within the kitchen, and then it goes to a bin of weapons, and knocks it over, and the snake falls over to go along with it. And you may think to yourself, well, how does that imply that it's on the left side of the monastery? Well, it actually comes from the fact that Asphira looks in at the room where she actually just observes what's going on. And it seems to be that she comes from the right. So, assuming that it's on the furthest end of the wing, it seems to be that the kitchen is on the left side of the monastery. And then again, to go with my logic on the bathroom being on the other side, it would mean that the bathroom is on the right side. And I am fairly happy with this idea. It makes sense that both of these would just be at the furthest ends of the monastery, and it would essentially sit at that. But on screen, you can now see the location of the kitchen and the bathroom. And I do think this is a fairly good layout at that. I think it makes sense, and it does feel cohesive enough. So with that, I moved on to the last part of the task, which was to decipher which of the rooms is actually belonging to who in terms of their bedrooms. And there's only one that we actually definitively know. The only one we know for a fact is that the guest room is on the left side of the monastery, because of Season 10. Of course, I will note, the Season 10 doesn't have the corridor, but I'm just going to ignore that, and I'm just going to assume that that's just the difference in animation company. But the guest room is definitely next to the kitchen, so I immediately placed it there. Remember again that at this point in time I am purely guessing, and this is my pure interpretation. Of course, I now need to know which of the ninja come from where. I'm trying to figure out which ninja actually do have some sort of spots depending on where they walk from or their windows. This is the level I went to. The first one is actually gonna be Zane. Zane does reside in the left side of the monastery, because in the very first episode of Season 11, Jay walks out of his room and walks to the left towards the relaxation room, which implies that he's on the left side of the monastery, because that is where the relaxation room is in accordance with the left side. So Zane can be on the left. We can also infer by this exact same logic that Pixel is also on the left side of the monastery, because at the end of the fire chapter, we actually see all of the ninja run in from the left side. And it is something that makes the most amount of sense. Also, it does then make sense in accordance with all of them running from the left, because all of them would have been towards the left, apart from Zane. So, Pixel can also go on the left, because it just correlates with the logic that I've gone with. But would you be surprised to hear that me finding this scene during my research actually gave me the answer to basically the rest of the bedrooms? The thing is that outside of the scene of Zane and Pixel, I had basically nothing else to go off of. I didn't really have much in the way of evidence to suggest where anyone else's room was. As far as I can tell, and from what I can find from my research, we don't have scenes of Ninja or anyone else walking into respective bedrooms. And that's a bit of a shame, because it definitely did limit the scope. But like I said, this scene with Pixel might have actually answered it. Because from here onwards, all we needed in terms of the layout was Nia, Jay, Lloyd, Kai, and Cole, and all of them have varying states. We've seen Nia's room, which is fair, and we have seen Lloyd's room as well, but we actually haven't seen anyone else's, and we don't have much more to go off of. But I think the order that the ninja run in is actually the order of which their rooms are laid out in the monastery. Remember, all of the ninja run in from the left, and presuming that all of them were alerted to the fact that Pixel woke up in a bit of a hurry, they all went directly to her room, and they all come in a single file line. It goes Nia, Jay, Lloyd, Kai, Cole, and it seems to be that they ran in order of where they were in accordance of the Monastery of Spinjitzu. They all run at about the same pace during the show. There's no one who's like definitively faster, so it makes sense to believe that all of them were just simply coming from their own respective areas. And that gives us the official answer of the layout of the monastery. Because if we're going with what we've got so far, which is having from left to right the kitchen, the guest room, Zane, and then Pixel, it means the last person on the left is Nia, and on the right it goes Jay, it goes Lloyd, Kai, and then Cole. Which means that on an overall, the layout does look like this, and I do think it is a fairly good one. I don't see any glaring issues, and if there is, I would love to know what you guys have to say about it. But like I said, this is my interpretation, and you may think that this is where the video ends. But no, it really doesn't. Because there was one more loose thread when it does come to the monastery that I wanted to answer, and that is the case of something that has now been referenced twice, and that is the south wing of the monastery. And you have no idea how much more research time this put on the video. In Seabound, Nia references Jay's destruction of the south wing of the monastery, and then Lloyd also references it within Dragon's Rising. And this has been a very interesting source of contention for me, because where actually is the south wing of the monastery? Of course, they imply that it is gone now, and that is all well and good, but the thing is that it had to have existed at one point. But the thing is that the structure of the monastery has never been different, and like I said, they specifically state it is the south wing of the monastery. So there had to have been something to do with it that we're just kind of missing. But also, what actually is south? We don't actually know what south is when it does come to the monastery. What is facing south when you do look at it from a compass? So I had to figure out where south was for the case of this video, and I figured it out. We have had very few instances of depicting the actual sun within Ninjago, but the thing is that we've had enough to actually figure out that the sun actually rises from behind the monastery and it sets directly in front of the monastery. Ergo, we know where east and west truly is. So we're left with north and south actually being the far ends of the wings of both of the monastery, and that's the thing. This is where I realised that the south wing physically couldn't exist, because where north and south has to be, we don't really have an answer as to where they could have been. It makes no sense in terms of an actual map. But the thing is that I do actually think I now know what they're referencing. I don't think the south wing is inherently a room. I don't think the south wing is an actual extension of the monastery that is actually gone. I think the south wing is the brick wall that Jay takes apart in Virtues of Spinjitzu. At the beginning of those shorts, you actually see Jay and Kai taking apart the wall for more bricks to be able to destroy. And it's a really fun scene, and he does destroy what could be considered to be the south because it makes sense in terms of its directions. And you may think that's really silly, but it's the only way for the south wing to truly exist. And what makes it even funnier is that we also know that Jay in fact blames Kai for the destruction of the south wing. And Kai was with Jay when they took apart the wall for bricks. So by all accounts, the south wing of the monastery isn't exactly what it's described to be, it's just simply the wall of the monastery. To be perfectly honest, I think when Nia and Lloyd actually tell the stories to Benthama and Aaron, I think it's just mainly just to serve as a way to show that you can evolve and you can become a better ninja or just a better person in general. And it's just a really fun thing that they probably also use to make fun of Jay. But I do think that is the best version we can say when it does come to the South Wing. And having Virtues of Spinjitzu link into it is really funny at the exact same time. Remember, it also does make sense, because the first time we hear about the destruction of the South Wing is Seabound, and presumably the only thing that happened beforehand that would make sense is Virtues of Spinjitzu. So, we officially have a completed layout. And this is it in front of you. This is my best interpretation of the layout of the Monastery of Spinjitzu, and I'm very curious to know what you guys do think of it, because I have just condensed down weeks worth of research, and I'm curious if I've just missed something very obvious. But like I said, as far as I can tell, this is the best interpretation that we do have, and I would love to know what you think. But on overall, the Monastery of Spinjitzu will never make any sense in terms of its layouts. There's a lot of liberties I had to take, and I'm sure I could probably have done better when it does come to it. But like I said, this is the best version I can make that makes some form of cohesive sense. So, just take away one thing. The Monastery of Spinjitzu makes absolutely no sense. It's not really cohesive in any stretch, and this is the best way to truly look at it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed my version of what the monastery truly looks like. Because apart from that, thank you very much for watching, and I do hope you enjoyed. I honestly had a lot of fun making this one, and let me know if you do want more videos where I dissect something completely useless like I have today. Honestly, this is just a lot of fun, and probably not worth my time, but it's completely fine. But like I said, I hope you do enjoy the video, and if you did, please consider subscribing. I love talking about Ninjago with more people, and if you do want to support the channel any further, which you don't have to, you could always become a channel member and join the legends that you do see on screen. Thank you very much, everyone. But that is about it for today, you guys, and thank you very much for watching, and take care. Okay,